or the heather grows, autumn, or the burnie rose, my bonnie dearie. As I gaed down the waterside, there I met my shepherd lad. He rowed me sweetly in his plaid, and he called me his dearie. Well, he can down the waterside and see the waves say sweetly glide beneath the hazels spreading wide. The moonhead shines full clearly.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Enough to Keep Going. This is episode number 136. I'm your host, SwissGuard, and this is the GX show where we talk games for the second one for March 2020. This is a very special GX show because for the first time in, I don't know, like 6 months, it seems, or more, we're actually attempting to go live. We're not recording it on Discord and then editing. We are live on the Twitch stream of one Agasicles Stemus, who is the first of my gaming colleagues that I will introduce tonight. How are you doing, Agasicles?
I'm doing good. This could very well fall apart very quickly, so we will see how it goes. This is definitely a science experiment, so I would ask you to hold on to your butts.
It's okay. We have a backup. We have a backup recording as well, so if this goes down in flames, we'll be able to put that on SoundCloud, and it'll also have like Easter eggs of our bemused confusion as we attempt to troubleshoot the inevitable problems during the live stream. But maybe things will go well and we'll be okay. Also joining us tonight is one DBqHams, who wasn't actually scheduled, but he was just so excited about the games that he's been playing that he kind of forced himself in on the show, and we tried to push him away, but he wouldn't take no for an answer, so he's here.
That's very true. You did. You tried to shoo me away. You said, not this week. We don't need you. Your opinions don't matter. I cried a little bit, and then I felt just like you guys are family because you put me down all the time. So it worked out just fine. But yes, I'm here. I don't know that I'm super excited about all the games that I've been playing, but there's nothing like a quarantine to give you some time to play some games. Actually, I was supposed to be on vacation this week. That's why I wasn't going to be here. I was supposed to be flying somewhere, but that doesn't really work out so well. So I'm here instead with you gentlemen. So thank you for having me.
All right. I actually am a little bit excited about tonight's show just because we have like a good mix of games. Obviously, our Pickz Playz, I'll detail what we're coming back with from that. So those games are generally a little bit older, but the new games that we've been playing, we actually have new games, which is also something we haven't really been able to say in 2020. There's been stuff here and there, but the two of you have actually been playing quite a bit of new releases. And the other cool thing is
not due to our own fault, by the way. Blame that on the games industry, because there just hasn't really been that much new to play.
So that'll also kind of segue later into our next Pickz Playz. But the other thing that I like is we have a lot of crossover games this week where multiple hosts have played the same game, and I think that's always a little bit more edifying when we can kind of bounce things off each other and kind of dig a little deeper into the quality or lack thereof of some of the games. We're not looking to bash anything, but sometimes, you're disappointed. So sounds like there's going to be a little bit of that from DB. But okay, Pickz Playz. Pickz Playz is when we kind of set a theme, topic, a genre, whatever, and we all go out and do our homework assignment, pick a game that meets the criteria, and we come back and we lead the show with that. So last 2 weeks ago, our Pickz Playz was as we prepare to sunset a console or two or three. It may be our last opportunity to revisit games that have gone out of support or maybe twilighted soon. Pick a game that is no longer supported or that you are convinced will go out of support when this console generation is sunsetted. So immediately that kind of removes quite a few big name games. So it's kind of like we're getting the B list or the C list, but I actually enjoyed this assignment. So I want to start with DB because this was a little bit of a surprise. I didn't see this coming. Battlefield Hardlines for the Xbox One. Why did you pick that? Like, what drew you to it, and how much time did you put into it?
So I think you probably didn't see it coming because I would have talked about it on the former show back when it was Casual Adult Gamers. This was spring of 2015 is when Battlefield Hardlines came out. I had picked up the Xbox in the fall of 14. That's when Destiny came out. Fall of 14. Hardlines came out in the spring of 15. I am level 90 as a character in Hardlines. I played a lot of Hardlines. It was something that Greylock and a number of other people from the Casual Adult Gamers forum played early. World Voyager and myself played a lot of it. I thought back to it for two reasons. One, the last time we did a GX show, we talked about Warzone, the new Call of Duty mode that Prime had been playing, and that it had the whatever the plunder mode is, where you're trying to rank up to or get $1 million. And Hardlines had a mode there as well, which was called Blood Money, where you were stealing, packing your bags full of loot, cash, and trying to get it back to your vault to bank it in order to win. That was one mode that World Voyager and I played a lot of, and I invested a ton of time in the Hotwire mode. So this is the mode where you were driving around, your vehicles were your capture points, and that the longer you held on to control of a vehicle and stayed moving with the vehicle at a top speed, that you would tick down the other team's score or their tickets. You could be an engineer and kind of repair the car as you went, shoot out the windows. It was also developed by Criterion, that mode. So of the Burnout kind of lineage. So there's a lot of kind of that arcadey racing that goes with it as well. And that's where I sunk a lot of my time. Diving back into it.
So this was Criterion payback for the assist with for the dice assist for Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, right?
Yes. Okay. Yep. Well, and this wasn't even a dice game because Battlefield was Visceral. So this was before Visceral. This was one of Visceral's last hurrahs.
That was kind of going to be one of my questions. Was you chose this for the Pickz Playz? Was it because of it being Battlefield, or this particular flavor of Battlefield, or was it like just kind of a tip of the cap to Visceral no longer being with us?
And while you're answering that, let me also throw my question. So, is this a cheat? Is this game going out of service at the end of this console generation, or is this one that is concurrently sunsetting servers in ish or around like when the console generation is going to end?
So I would say that this one, the reason I picked this is one, obviously I have a history with it, which I just kind of just kind of explained. But my expectation is uh, that it's not going to be supported. I was surprised technically that the servers are still up. That if you look in the Battlefield menu on Battlefield, what are we in, 5, right? World War II one, Battlefield 5. That you can go off to the side in the Battlefield menu, and you will see Battlefield 4, you will see Battlefield 1, and you'll see Battlefield 5. And you don't see this, even though it came out after Battlefield 4. But Battlefield 4 is still supported. So my assumption is that this is the one that because DICE didn't develop it, they're not going to really continue to support it because EA shut the studio down. There's not a lot of publisher support for it. I would be shocked if the servers continue. Looking at the player base that I found a couple nights on Xbox, it's relatively tiny. I mean, so that is why I chose this, is that it is kind of the forgotten Battlefield of this generation, and my assumption would be that there's not a big enough player base or a long tail in microtransactions to be able to justify why they would keep those servers up.
All right. And I mean, I'm just giving you guff.
No. If we're going to talk about cheats, we can go to Swiss's pick, because I don't even think that is a server-based game. Like, is there a check? Is this a mobile game that can have a check?
I had a different interpretation.
Okay. So my interpretation is that these are server supported. The game will not function, or this mode of the game. I can still load up the Visceral created story mode, right. Which will still be there, but the multiplayer piece of it, I would assume, is going to hit some dead servers soon.
Yeah, and I mean, it's fine. It's all topical.
No, right? Yeah, it's all very much. But yeah, so that was that was my experience. It was kind of fun to dive back into it. It's like revisiting, your old neighborhood is really what it feels like, right? Because those maps, you remember them. This was the game that I spent. I bought a season pass for before I bought the season pass for Destiny, so I had spent a lot of time in this, and so it was kind of going back to those maps and remembering the shortcuts and things like that. So it was enjoyable.
Were there people still playing on the server?
No.
I mean, like, even ones or two. Because one of the things that's always surprised me is, I think last year, I went back and was playing one of the Call of Duties, the one that I don't like, Ghosts, I guess. I don't know if I'm thinking of the right one.
Yeah, Ghost was. Yeah, it was the first one of this generation.
I guess
Infinity Ward.
Yes, yeah. And surprisingly, there are still a ton of people, like in the hundreds, playing that game on those servers. You have a very dedicated. And I mean, I talked about this a little bit when I talked about Black Ops 4. That's like the hardcore Black Ops 4 crowd. Even though the game has technically been superseded by Modern Warfare, there's still a hardcore, dedicated set of Black Ops players who haven't budged and aren't moving on to the next one because they like that game. So I was just curious if maybe it still had like a cult following.
So I would say that I shouldn't be as dismissive. That there were server games I could get into. I had to kind of keep expanding my search. If I was just going to limit to the modes that were preset in there from the last time I played it a few years ago, I wasn't finding a whole lot. Right, there were servers up, but they were not very populated. They were small populations. But if I expanded it out, I could find some games. So yes, there are still people playing it. I didn't get a chance to, but I would be really curious, like you were saying with Ghosts or with this, what's that community look like in terms of the dialogue, of the kind of culture of that community, if they're still up and going 5 years after a release of a game. So anyhow, that is my experience with Battlefield Hardlines. A good game. Was dismissed in part by EA and by DICE because it wasn't created by them. So,
well, I'm glad that you enjoyed your time, at least.
Does that mean that you didn't enjoy your time?
Oh, no, I did. Like, it could have been like it could have been painful, but you got to reminisce, even though it's a little bit bittersweet that it is seemed to be quite sunsetting. But all right, since you threw down the gauntlet, I suppose we should discuss my Pickz Playz assignment. I looked at it when last week. Agasicles and I did a lot of talk with about the new consoles, and it kind of meandered into a discussion, as they tend to do, because this is where the real battle is going to be in the services. And we talked about with PS4, right now they've only announced backwards compatibility for the top 100 games. So when I was looking at this, I'm not a huge online multiplayer guy, so it was a little bit harder.
And just for the audience to say, so that has since been so where Swiss is talking about, and where you're talking about Swiss is at the time that we recorded last week's episode. That has and at the time you picked that game, that has since been revised, kind of sort of technically by PlayStation, saying that the vast majority of PS4 games will be backwards compatible. But as you people who listened to the last episode know, as of when we recorded, Sony was on record as saying it was the top 100 games.
Okay, so I guess that kind of I hadn't seen that news, so I'm not sure when that dropped. But
no. But I think your assignment and how you went about your methodology and your rationale is still spot on, because you could only go on what you knew at the time.
Right. So basically, I was just looking at a game that was like more of a lesser PS4 game. I'm looking at the collection here, and it's like, okay, Nier Automata, stuff like that, Metal Gear Solid 5. I imagine a lot of those games that I played Nier Automata, but that I haven't played yet would be moving forward. And I saw Odin Sphere, and I'm like, you know what? That's kind of it's vanillaware. It's not like a huge name franchise. And if there was one that, at least at the initial outset, might be left out and kind of left with the PS4 generation that I had, it could be it. And it was one that I wanted to play. So
who's the developer on this?
Vanillaware. They've done that. They did Dragon's.
I thought you were pulling my leg.
Dragon's Crown, Miramasa.
Okay.
Yeah, this was a PlayStation 2 game.
Right, and then they remastered it for PS4
and Vita as well.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
So very anime, but with like a Norse kind of feeling storyline. Obviously, with Odin in the title, you can kind of get that. But I had a lot of fun with it, and I'm eager to keep playing it. So it's 2D, but the maps are kind of sprawling, but they're little kind of segments. So you start out, you like have a battle segment, and you'll fight some enemies in the map, and it's not like it's just kind of like a section. You have to kill all the enemies in there, then it's done. You get a rating based on like if you can keep how high your chain is of attacks. It's like an action RPG, and then you can move on to like the rest areas, and it kind of just sprawls. But because the battles are so quick hit, and the combat's so fast and fluid, it's just enjoyable to play. Like I feel like I can jump in, play a little bit of the map, get some battles. I really like trying to like max out my chain of fighting the enemies, and so yeah, you feel powerful in it. It's just a pretty cool slick game. So I would say that the one thing that I don't like is there's a lot of crafting in it, but like they go the Red Dead Redemption 2 route, where it's like you have to manually do the stuff. Like you have to plant you plant something with the seed, then you have to basically water the seed with some of the phosons that you collect when you kill enemies, and then it sprouts, and then you have to harvest the fruit, and then you eat the fruit, and that's how you gain experience points. So
is the gameplay, is the action side of the gameplay kind of Metroidvania-like?
No, it almost feels like it's way more. It's a lot more actiony than it almost feels like a fighter, like you're fighting waves of enemies. Yeah,
like a side scroller RPG. Is what it feels like.
It feels like an old school beat 'em up. More.
Yep.
Yeah,
with stats and some RPG stuff, because Dragon's Crown ends up feeling kind of similar in that Dragon's Crown moves even further in that direction of kind of the final fight, arcade 4-player kind of walking beat 'em up screen advances type of thing.
but as you go through, though, you unlock new moves and you can level your moves up, and so you can kind of equip sets of skills. The first character you are is a Valkyrie, and like you can fly across the screen and skewer people with your spear, and then kick them in the air, and like original Devil May Cry style. Once they're in the air, you can juggle them and then slam them down, and all this is linking your chain. So I was having a lot of fun with it. There's some story sequences, and it's got like your anime melodrama, but they don't. They're not too long. I didn't feel like I was having to sit there forever and ever and ever and watch endless dialogue. It gets you in, and like the bite-sized chunks, and that's got to be a remnant of the PS2 era. That's how they broke it up in order, I think, to with the limitations of the hardware. But I like the way that it ends up feeling as you go through the game. So yeah, I recommend it, and while it may not be the closest match to the Pickz Playz, I felt like this may become a forgotten game and kind of fall by the wayside, so I wanted to resurrect it. All right, so that will leave us with Agasicles, who, surprise, surprise, selected a racing title. But this one's kind of interesting, and I have a lot of the same questions for you, Agasicles, that we basically already went through with DB on Battlefield Hardline, which is, so DriveClub was kind of leveraged as really trying to be social and playing within a club. Do you play within a club with that, or did you just pick it for the racing experience itself and go solo?
So I am a member of a DriveClub. I have absolutely no idea who those people are in the club. I have no idea how I joined the club or why I came across it. I don't know if they sent me an invite at random or if I just sought them out at random. None of them were online playing. So yeah. So the story of DriveClub is, to me, so interesting. In this show, we tend to go very deep on gaming history. Because it's, as we age, and more I get amazed at the number of years of gaming history we've covered when we were, a thing that we consider historical now, we actually covered live in real time when it was happening, so that's a little disconcerting. But, in the launch of the PlayStation 4, and we were online in different iterations of this podcast and the whole walk up to the launch of the PlayStation 4, the big story of this game was it was supposed to be a launch title. And it was particularly interesting because Sony had actually gone out and acquired the studio, Evolution Studios, who had since I think maybe the PlayStation 2 era, had essentially become a PlayStation exclusive studio. So, and having done like the ATX, what was it, ATX or ATV, MX versus ATV series, and then in the wake of the tsunami in Asia, the ATX, I keep getting this mixed up, ATV versus MX or whatever, Avalanche, which of course was delayed and then eventually launched. But they had been around since the PlayStation 2. They had actually done a launch title in the PlayStation 2 or PlayStation 3, I think. And this was supposed to be a launch title for PlayStation 4, which was also weird because it was not a Gran Turismo title. Further deepening the mystery and controversy around this title because, of course, we got Gran Turismo, I think 6 on the PlayStation 3, which came out after the launch of the PlayStation 4. So while Polyphony, who's a studio that I'm not a huge fan of because I don't know how they get away with doing what they do, launched the title on the last generation console, while Evolution Studios was teed up to do the launch title for PlayStation 4. So, of course, it didn't actually come out in the launch window. It was delayed, and it was actually delayed 2 years. I don't think it did. Let me go back a little bit. The whole point of this launch window title was supposed to be that everybody who was a PlayStation Plus customer was supposed to get it for free. And so the idea was this was going to be the thing that kind of pulled people over the divide of, people who had historically looked at PlayStation Plus as not being a necessity, because you could still play online without PlayStation Plus versus Xbox, where you had to be an Xbox Live Gold subscriber in order to play online.
It's so funny to think of that now, because this far into the generation, it's just expected that everybody's paying for it. But at the start of the generation, that was, right? That idea of PlayStation players having to pay for PS Plus to play multiplayer. And that this was one of the selling points, that this was going to be a package. But I'll let you continue telling the history.
Yeah, so the game didn't launch in 2013, and so it launched in 2014, I think, very late. But the big deal was the PlayStation Plus version of it, the one people were supposed to get for free, wasn't rolled out until 2015. So it's generally a 2-year delay when you really think about it, because I wasn't going to pay out of pocket for it in 2014. The other big problem with the thing when it launched was, like, I would say 70% of the content that you could see that was in front of your face was behind a DLC paywall. So, and what was weird was, like, when you were up on the screen, and I groused about this when we were playing Killzone on Xbox One in the launch window, you would be presented, you would be presented, here's an event, and you would play that event, and, like, the next 2 events, right, theoretically sequentially after that, you wouldn't be able to play because there was DLC associated with them. And sometimes the DLC was the car, sometimes the DLC was the track. Then, like, the third event you could access. So it was this whole checkerboard thing, and I was like, this makes no sense. Like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to progress this. Sony got me, because what I did was, I was like, I didn't have no time to deal with this confusing morass. I just went ahead and paid for the season pass or whatever, unlocked all the stuff, and then I said fine, and then I started playing the game. I think in 2016 or 2017, I think 2017, so maybe after the thing had been on the street for 2 years as a PlayStation Plus title, they eventually removed all that stuff and you could actually play all the content in the game. It's such a shame because it's actually a really good racing game and could have really competed well with maybe not so much Forza Motorsport, since Forza Motorsport is so much wired towards gearheads, but could have definitely competed decently with Forza Horizons, which is a little more, still has the same underlying physics engine of Forza Motorsport, but it just comes at you without all the complication I feel like Forza Motorsport presents itself with. It's a really fun game. It has some really great cars. The tracks are super interesting. They're completely different. It has, the dynamic weather engine wasn't deployed initially. I don't remember if that was I don't think that was even in the 2015 PlayStation Plus version. I think that didn't come out until it either came in between the paid version and the PlayStation Plus version, or it came out after the PlayStation Plus version. But it's got dynamic weather in it. You will start a race. It will be light drizzle. The rain will progress to get worse and worse as the race goes on. Daylight conditions, will deepen, and so you can start a game you can start a race in twilight and see it progressively get darker as you go through it. All of which increases the challenge. So, corners that you have trouble mastering while you still have daylight, like if you haven't figured out how to master that corner halfway through the race, it goes pitch black, and you're like, well, okay, I guess I'm just completely, derped at this point. So it's a really wonderful game. That it's such a shame that it was, entangled in all this controversy and whatnot. And of course we still didn't really get a decent Gran Turismo in the PlayStation 4 generation either. So, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. Amazingly enough, all the social features were there. The reason I picked the game is the game technically won't necessarily sunset. It'll be very interesting to see if this one is made backwards compatible on PlayStation 4. The single player is still available. What will sunset at the end of this month, actually within a short number of days, is all the multiplayer stuff won't be supported. So As far as the servers go, so I don't really know if that necessarily means all multiplayer functionality will cease. Interestingly enough, I was live streaming this when I played it, and I actually ran into a guy, came into the chat room here, and said that he was a big fan of the game, and he and I actually played for like the second hour that I was on live streaming. So that was pretty interesting. But yeah, that's the tale of the tape. It's a.
So did you pick that because of that you knew the servers were?
Yes.
Like some okay.
Yeah, the announcement came out like late last. The announcement came out I think last spring, and so all the DLC went inert in August of 2019. You could no longer purchase the DLC, and the notification had already been given that the servers were gonna go down at the end of this month. So it had already kind of been on my radar as something I wanted to go back and play before the multiplayer servers went down. So yeah.
How active was was there still multiplayer pieces going on there? I mean, was it pretty active?
There were still events, like you could see that there were events with start times that were still going on, and I don't know how those get organized. I didn't actually participate in them, but like I said, I was able to jump in with a single additional player online and play some multiplayer races. So, yep. Nice.
Yeah, I know the series you're speaking of because I have it, the DriveClub for VR. So
okay.
We did a VR one as well. Yep.
Yeah, and of course, I guess I better play this maybe over the weekend because I've never actually fired it up. Of course, the game, I guess it was DLC that came out with it, but it's DriveClub, but then there's also DriveClub Bikes, which is motorcycles. So which I have not played, but then yeah, DriveClub VR was released, I believe, as a separate title.
Yeah, it's its own standalone title. Yeah, I think it uses some of the same engine, obviously, but it's a standalone. It's not a plug-in into expansion into this game.
Right, you don't get buying DriveClub VR, as far as I know, doesn't get you access to DriveClub, and buying DriveClub didn't get you access to DriveClub VR. Such a weird, strange, like one-off storied history with the thing. And of course, the sad thing is Evolution Studios, of course, in the wake of this was shut down, and
that's what I was just gonna say as well, right? The studio doesn't exist anymore.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some of the newer stuff that we played too. Going from DriveClub, how about we stick in the sporting realm? Both of you gentlemen tried out MLB The Show 20. And DB, let's start with you. What were your impressions of it? I know you're a pretty big MLB The Show fan, aren't you?
Yeah, I've enjoyed the series for the last 4 years or so. Last year at the end of the superlative show, that MLB 19 was the game that I assumed that I'd still be playing in 2020. And the short answer is I will still be playing MLB 19 in 2020. That's not a knock on MLB 20. And we'll Agasicles, I'm very curious on your take here, because I did notice some of the same things you were talking about, some of the changes to the fielding, some of the touchiness in the preload for fielding and throwing to a base. Overall, the graphics feel a little more refined than last year. This is the end of a console generation. You're not expecting a big leap. You're expecting some tweaks and refinement. Playing most of the game looks much better. What I was surprised was, like, when I did an exhibition game, the models, the graphics all look better than 19. But when I went into Road to the Show in MLB 20 and played a couple games with my character, then went back to MLB 19 Road to the Show, everything looks the same. Even the on-field stuff, like, it feels a little less crisp than the exhibition games. And so, again, that's just one of the many modes. And I think one of the things MLB does really well, the show does really well, is that there's a game mode for everybody, right? Like, Like, if you want to make this your own story and do Road to the Show and develop your player, you've got that. If you want to make this your fantasy baseball league with card collecting, you've got that. If you want to make it a franchise where you've got control over player movement and everything else, you've got that as well. I mean, if you want to jump in and live the fantasy of taking your team to the pennant, you've got March to October where you're kind of jumping in, and so there's a different mode for any type of baseball player here. I think it's a solid game. I mean, from what I've played, I like the new batting mechanic in terms of the multiple dots and the zone batting. So there are multiple different types of batting styles, but one of the batting, the new addition here is you have kind of parentheses that expand out a little bit, and then you get 3 different dots as like your center. And depending on where you line those up, you're either you're gonna have a square contact with the ball, you're gonna hit it a little high or a little low, you're gonna get a little off contact, and I like that feedback mechanism better than what they've had in the past, where it's simply just been a center dot, or it's been.
And those things are supposed to represent. One is your hitting, your bat swing area basically. The other one is supposed to be the batter's vision, and that's why it's basically, if I understand it correctly, it's supposed to be representative of like the maximum area that he can focus in for his swing. So even though your swing may not line up exactly with where the ball's going, it's more so determined by his vision focal area is supposed to be able to compensate for that, and that's why you can see that it's different for different batters. So more highly skilled batters with a better eye for the ball, their vision area will be bigger. Exactly,
you'll get multiple rings versus just kind of one, and it'll get much wider. Yeah, no, that's a nice way to describe it. So that's my quick kind of overview. I want to hear, Agasicles, you played a little bit of 19, not very much, so you're kind of jumping into this a little more fresher than I am. So what's your read on it so far?
Yeah, so I don't know how much our time. So I've actually spent about 10 hours playing it. So I've got a pretty decent.
Okay, I think I'm 3 hours in.
Okay, yeah. So I've put a significant amount, not a significant amount, but I've put a good chunk of beginner upfront time in it, and I've gone in and tweaked under the hood through multiple iterations, trying to get the baseball game to the simulation part to play the way I want it to play. So a little bit. It took a little bit of umbrage to Swiss's suggestion that you're more into MLB than I am. I have played MLB 18, 19, and 20. So now I am only interested in the franchise mode. That's just the kind of sports player that I am. What has made this difficult for me, and what I'll say is I groused a lot about the game on the front end. I will say as we tee up tonight for this podcast, I would. Given a choice, I would actually rather be playing MLB The Show 20 than Doom Eternal. The problem for me is that, and it's more so kind of how they've trained you over the last few years. To me, how the game plays at the defaults, I was very accustomed to the feel of that in MLB 18 and 19. And it is different for MLB 20. It is starkly different. They have gone under the hood and done a ton of things in the engine part of it that don't necessarily jump out at you on the visual front end part of it, and that leads to a very jarring, kind of misleading experience, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. That certainly in those kind of default settings, it plays and feels different than. 2 weeks ago I was playing 19, and it feels very different.
Right. Yeah, and again that's the type of sports player I am. Is the sports games that in my memory are the ones that are my favorites, are the ones that essentially play and give me that realistic outcome in a season at the default settings out of the box without me having to monkey around with them too much. So DBQ mentioned like the sensitivity, and a lot of this is about sensitivity, and it's sensitivity without the ability to really tweak a range that gets it to back off from that sensitivity very well. The sensitivity of preload is at a point where it makes it, and preload is one of my favorite things because it makes the fielding feel like you're actually participating. Like, in the way it is right now, you either just grit your teeth and bear the overly sensitive button depression in preload, or you just turn it off. And when you turn it off, basically you're not really playing fielding, because at that point the fielders are just auto deciding, how to field, and they're auto. Several times, another part of this is there's also some settings where I feel like I have set it so that I should have control back, but the fielders still do things that are unexpected. On multiple occasions, I picked up the ball. Now, this is when I didn't have preload on. I picked up the ball and tried to throw to first. Those were not the right decisions to make. But what made me angry was, instead of trying to throw the guy out at first, they threw to second, right, to get the base runner to hold up. And I'm like, that's not the point. Is that's not the button that I pushed. And I mean, I've lived multiple decades with the whole Madden thing of like, I swore I pushed a different button, and you really didn't. You really pushed the wrong button. But on multiple occasions, I definitively hit the circle button, and it should have passed to first base, but that's not what the fielder did. But the preload button is overly sensitive to where the range of sensitivity and where you push the button is just going to cause you to overthrow a significant amount of the time. I did learn, and again, another thing that's frustrating to me is they tell you things in the tutorial that I don't need them to tell me. There are things that I could use them telling me in the tutorial that they don't tell you. So one of the things is that you can correct the preload if you enter a second command fast enough, right before the fielder throws. They do not tell you that. So getting a hold of the preload is incredibly difficult. I would say one of the other things is, the fielders are slow off the jump in terms of reaction speed when it's going to the outfield, to where the typical setting that I play in is where the CPU auto-selects the fielder and gets them moving in the direction of the ball, and then it hands control off to you. They are slow enough off the jump that when the CPU hands control off to me, there's no way in the world the player's ever going to catch up to the ball. That is starkly different than they were in 18 and 19. I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but there are definitely bugs. I saw bugs before I bought the game of like home run flies that just shouldn't have been home runs. And in one case, I had a ball that was clearly inside the park and struck right at the corner of the bottom of the fence where it met the grass, and I guess it rolled under the fence or something because the CPU declared that a home run. And I'm like, I have control of the fielder. He's running to the ball. I'm like, he's going to get it. He's going to get it right at the wall, and then the ball hits the wall and then is called a home run. And I'm like, what the heck is that? But one of the biggest things that I'm sorry, Swiss, were you going to jump in and ask?
Yeah, I was going to say, out of all, go ahead and mention your biggest thing, and then I'll finish.
So my biggest thing, my biggest problem with the whole thing is, I guess I have a biggest thing, and then a biggest thing underneath that is, as you crank up the difficulty, I don't feel like the game gets more difficult. I just feel like it gets more random. And so, despite you giving inputs and controls that should yield good play, the end result of that outcome will often still be the pitcher throwing a wild pitch. So in the most frustrating example of that, and I have multiple instances in my live streams where you can go and you can view this, is I have points where, so depending on what pitching style you use, there was a point where I was trying to use, it's not what I usually use in 18 and 19, but I was trying to use the analog sweeping control input. I don't know what the exact name of it is called, but basically you go into your motion, you hit once on the power end of the slider sweep, and then you hit it a second time, then it kind of rubber bands back and snaps back, and you're supposed to hit it right at this point where it crosses the money line. Well, there are multiple times that I hit that money line, which what it should be is that should be a perfect pitch. Almost every single time that I hit that line, the CPU not only gets a bat on it, but it's frequently a home run, and it is definitely even at a higher level of frequency, is a money play where they smack it into the outfield, it drops before anybody can get to it, and it winds up being multiple bases. And I'm like, just from a game design philosophy, if the player throws a perfect pitch, that should not predominantly yield the batter smacking it out of the park. That's just not how that should work. Because then the incentive is, why would I ever try to throw a perfect pitch?
So you sound frustrated. But like a few minutes ago, you said that you want to spend more time with it versus Doom Eternal. And is that just because you feel like you've massaged the game to a point now where you can start moving forward with it? Or is there something wrong with Doom Eternal?
There's some things with Doom Eternal in terms of its choices in design that they cause a certain impact, and we can talk about that when we get to it. But yeah, I think so the end result of what they've been tweaking under the engine is I normally play with dynamic settings somewhere between rookie and veteran in MLB 18 and 19. What I had to do with this game is I just had to strip all my settings out and reset it back to default, which is not easy because there are sliders, there are settings, and then there are defaults somewhere underneath settings that aren't really represented. Like there's no way to delete them or get them to reset to default, so I just had to create a new set of baseline settings. I reset them to beginner, and now I'm playing somewhere between beginner and rookie, and that seems like it's more of an area where I can get under the hood and tweak some of those settings to make the game more to my particular style of gameplay. And then in the course of that, I'm just going to have to eat the preload, because there just seems to be no way to get that to tweak the way I'd really like.
You feel like you found that sweet spot then? I mean, that was my question when we started talking about this in Discord was, are these sliders that can be tweaked, or is this something that's going to take a patch because it's more engine based?
I think it's going to take a patch. I mean, I think, yeah, because like I said, the preload, like I have the preload set all the way. So even with me moving sliders, the outfielders are still slow off the jump to get to the ball. I have the outfield. I basically have the game set so it fields on its own, and now the only thing I do is preload because the handoff from CP. So it's, to me, the implementation is still less elegant than 18 and 19, but I'm swinging it at least to a point where difficulty-wise it's more manageable and the degree of chaos feels less. And at the end of the day, playing baseball is just really rewarding. But go ahead, Swiss.
I was going to say, like, 2 weeks from now at the next GX show, I'm going to be curious to hear whether you've found that found that sweet spot with the game, and like it's become more enjoyable for you, because right now it very much sounds like you're an IT person that is mad at the system, and it's like more of a challenge for you to make it work rather than the game itself.
Well, the most disappointing thing is what happens is the game plays fine 80% of the time. But that 20% that it's not, like, the anger level is up here. So for 80% of the time I'm completely fine, and then I just hit these points of like 20% frustration that wreck it all.
Yeah, I would say this is we can get off the topic, but patching from Sony San Diego isn't a new thing, right? This is pretty consistent that it takes this game, sometimes out of the box it's been pretty playable, but they still tweaked batting and some other pieces that usually by the time we round into the summer is when this game is at a good kind of state and stable.
Right. Just in time for the World Series, right?
All right, so let's go ahead and move on to a few of the other games. We have two games that are new releases, and I know you guys have already hinted when we talk about the Pickz Playz, foreshadowing. You're going to use these games in the Pickz Playz, it seems like. So let's not spend a lot of time on them this week. Let's get your quick overview impressions, and we can, as you spend more time with them, we can probably hit them harder next week in a fortnight in the next GX show Pickz Playz segment. So DB, you picked up Animal Crossing New Horizon. The biggest question that I have for you on this game, like obviously one, is it fun? But two, the one switch per island limit. And you have two boys that are at the age that, they're old enough where they're going to be wanting to do their own thing on the Switch. And has that single switch single island per Switch been a limitation for you? Because quite honestly, I marked the game off my to-get list once I saw that.
I would say a month ago, I had taken it off once I had seen that as well. And put it back on kind of with the state of the coronavirus and the reality of I'm going to have a lot of time home with my kids. And, I have found, and I will say that I enjoy Animal Crossing in terms of I enjoy doing the stuff of Animal Crossing. The act of playing I enjoy and have since the DS game Wild World, but I've never gotten into like the Tom Nook chase of continuing to get a bigger house or carpet. And so for me, actually, I was hesitant about sharing the island with my sons, and actually only one of my two sons is playing, and so it works out well. He started it up. And specifically for this podcast, I kind of wanted to play as the second player just to see, what would be different. What would I be missing? Like I didn't get to name the island. Okay, that to me that's not a big deal. I don't really care. I still get to I get a house on the island, or I get a tent and then a house. I can still place it where I want. He and I work together to turn in enough stuff to build a museum, and we can play co-op together and go to one of the kind of random islands where you can grab additional resources. And so, when we're building stuff, we could kind of pool our resources that way. So I don't feel like I'm missing a whole lot because I still get I'm not the one who's getting the incentive to, you need to build a bridge so you can get over to the shop rather than use the pole to jump across the river. You need to do this to get a ladder. I just get it afterward. Like once he does it, I get the crafting recipe and then I can do it. Like in some ways it's the better game experience for me because I don't want to be hindered by the game telling me like, now you have to do this, but you can't do it until we tell you to.
So is this like Death Stranding in Animal Crossing? Or is it worse than Death Stranding?
Well, no, I mean, I think it is...
Because you can't use like ladders and bridges and stuff that other players have created.
So you can use, once it's in your world, you can create it. And a ladder is craftable, so it becomes one of your tools. You can carry it around and bring it up. My son built the bridge last night. But before then, we would just pole vault over the rivers. There's still, I think the difference is like as you get later in the game, some of the terraforming stuff in terms of kind of reshaping your island, you can't do as a second player unless you are designated a best friend within the game world, and then you can do some of that. So, there's a lot of stuff out there in terms of it's not the complete experience, I guess is the truth, because you're not getting that kind of story progression, but it doesn't feel nearly as limited and kind of truncated as the YouTube gaming media made it seem, right? I mean, reading about this and listening to things, it sounded a whole lot more kind of chopped off than my experience has been.
Well, the thing is like I just don't, and we don't have to get into it now. We probably need to get into this in a deep dive episode. Like I don't, or maybe when we come back for Pickz Playz, like I just don't get it. Like it's not
that's understandable. That's a whole different piece,
right? Yeah. Like it's not Pokemon, right? At least with Pokemon Sword and Shield, I get it. You can buy both games, right? But like this thing, like there's no like you can't give Nintendo more money to get around this thing. It's just a deliberate design limitation, and I'm like, I don't understand it.
Yeah, it seems like there should be a way, or it certainly could have been a way where, even given the islands set up, that they could have had multiple islands, adjacent to the main island. Like, even if you didn't get as big of a landmass, but you still had your own landmass, or that they were all different land masses that you could visit. It seems like somewhere early in this design process, they made a decision and it locked them into this limitation.
So let me try and see if I can. If you had a second, so if you had a second Switch, so if you were on a family plan with the Nintendo Online thing, and that's a Byzantine thing in and of itself. I think Swiss is like the only human being on the planet who understands it because he's had to toil with it so much. If you had a second Switch, first question is, if you had a second Switch, would you be able to surmount this problem? And if you had a second Switch, in both cases, you're on one family plan. If you had a second Switch, would you surmount this? If you had a second Switch with a second instance of the game, do you avoid this? Is there, in those graduations, are you able to play multiplayer, but obtain the full progression experience?
So my understanding is that yes, in my case, if I would have a second Switch, which shortly I may be able to test, and it have a digital copy or a second physical copy, that because the save is connected to the system and not the profile, that I could use the same game, the same digital game, and as long as I'm on the Nintendo Online network and have a Wi-Fi connection, I could be playing on two different systems. And so that would be the workaround. But I mean, that workaround is like a $300 workaround.
Right. But you would be able to visit your kid's island.
I believe so.
Okay.
There's a little bit of a caveat with that. Well, the one thing is, if you only have one digital copy, both Switches are on the same family plan, and you can't be playing the game simultaneously. So, and that's just the limitation of how Nintendo Online works. So you almost have to have one digital copy and one physical copy, or two physical copies. I think it would be the only way to get around that. Because if that
really is a head scratcher. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll wait for more thoughts on that. But I'm like everybody else. It doesn't. I can't think of a good software development reason to do this, and there may be one, but
yes, right. This is where the act of playing the game is a whole lot more enjoyable. The setup the structure around the game, which is frustrating.
Right.
Well,
real quick. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I guess, I mean, maybe this is more of the onion that we need to peel back, and maybe DBQ will be able to peel it back, by doing what, unfortunately, we so often do on this podcast, which is spend more money to effectively get to a decent test setup. But I can understand if the thing is to attempt to force you to buy, an additional Switch and or an additional copy of the game. It would be nice if it only drove you to do one of those things and not both. So I guess that's kind of the tail of the tape that we're still waiting to find out and understand. And maybe I'll ask around and see if other people know.
All right, stay on the mic, Agasicles, and give us your real quick hit preview on Doom Eternal and why it is a little, perhaps not as impressive for you.
Yeah, so in general, and I'm about 3 hours into Doom Eternal, so I've definitely put less time into it than MLB The Show 20. The issue for me with Doom Eternal is, and the game looks good. I'm discovering some things about myself as a player in terms of, I am a graphics snob, but I think what I'm actually really realizing is more so than graphics, it's art. So I love really great looking graphics, but it needs to be combined with really great art. Doom, in my mind, doesn't have the same kind of, I feel like, world building architecture that appeals to me like a Destiny 2 does, or maybe even a Halo to a certain extent. So the game looks good. It's just there aren't as interesting things for me to look at in the world. And then with with Destiny 2, you have everything, right? You have buildings, you have planets, you have ships, you have the speeder bike. So there's a lot more design things that I find interesting in something like a Destiny 2. I'm glad
you used Destiny 2 as the example, because as soon as you said that, that's the first thing that I thought of.
Okay. So then gameplay-wise, where I'm rubbing up against Doom Eternal, and it's a good game. So one thing for people to understand who are listening to the show or watching the show, live, or who see the taped version, the archived version afterwards, what you need to understand is we don't get games for free. The games that we get, we pay out of pocket. Therefore, from our own limitation, I would contend that in general, we play a ton of games, right? Across the three of us, we play at least 24 new games a year. Those are still generally the best 24 games that have been released by the industry, right? So when we criticize a game, understand that we're criticizing, like, in many cases, the best of the games that are released in a year.
We're nitpicking.
Yes. For the average gamer, these will be nitpicks. So the thing with Doom Eternal is it's very frenetic. You never get time to relax. But it's so frenetic and so non-relaxing that it backs off from some of the kind of puzzle solving and things that I find particularly appealing in shooters. So when I compare it to a Far Cry 5, right? You guys listen to me many times that year talk about how I loved Far Cry 5 and that you could get to the edge of an encampment, you could kind of survey the territory, you could get a sense of where people were, and you could plan your assault. And you were given a big bucket of tools to selectively decide how you were going to take that encampment down. I would contend that the same is kind of true of Just Cause 3, in a slightly different way, but in general, a lot of tools, a lot of things laying around in the environment, helos, planes, different ways to approach a given place to take it down. Destiny 2, not so much the planning, but Destiny 2 backs off of the frenetic degree to a point where, in terms of battle space management, you can go into a space, and as things emerge, right, in different points, you can consciously think, let me clear this section out. Like, I can't take all of these guys out at once, but let me try and control this corridor or this lane, and make that my battle space so I have some space to maneuver around in and take out some of these other guys. You can change the geometry of a given combat engagement in Destiny 2, force the enemy to engage you in a way that's less advantageous, right, given the geometry and geography of a given room. Doom, you get none of that time. Like, things spawn, they spawn quickly, you can't see them all, you get attacked and assaulted from different ways at areas and zones, and it makes it like a 1980s game in terms of it just pounds and assaults you to where you just have to go back to the checkpoint and replay it. Now, when you come back and replay it, all of those things are the same. So it makes it very much like you're just trying to figure out the pattern of a room. And so
it sounds like, I don't want to use this term because it's going to come across too strong, but yeah, it almost feels like a cheat. In a way, like, and here's like a short anecdote, like, and this is kind of an off the wall anecdote, but Jerry Seinfeld did like a show with some other comedians, and they're like talking to him, and they're like, man, you never swear or use curse words in your shows. And he's like, no. He's like, I did once. And they're like, really? He's like, yeah, I used the F-bomb in a joke, and I got a laugh. And the next night that I did it, I did the joke without the F-bomb, and it fell flat. It wasn't any good. And I realized that the F-bomb was a crutch, and I didn't want any of my jokes I wanted them to be funny because they were funny. I didn't want to rely on that, so he stopped doing it. And like when you say like the 1980s style, the technical limitations in order to increase the challenge, it's like, well, we're just going to assault you and make it almost impossible skill based to get through. And so that's why I kind of see it as a cheat. It's like a crutch.
Right. So the challenge becomes replaying a given level and just kind of tweaking and adjusting. You're right. You're not tweaking and adjusting your combat style. or your applicability of the tools. What you're really tweaking and adjusting is reacting and responding to the assault pattern that you gleaned from the last time you were in the room, right, or the first time you were in the room. So it doesn't feel. Whereas, like, I feel like in Destiny 2, I have a combat style, and that combat style is applicable to what class I'm playing, and I play a certain way, and that becomes kind of a repertoire that, to me, in the real world, right, when I talk about, you know, the things that I did in the military, it's very akin to that skill set, right? It feels like doctrine and policy that I learned, and that, even given that as my baseline, I could still encounter situations where I could still iterate upon that. Whereas this is just completely rote, mechanical, muscle memory. You know, there's a very small amount of doctrine and policy in it, right? There's a thing that I cycle through of, like, take care of health now, and then I switch and I say take care of ammo now, right? Because you have to replenish those things within the game rules, and there are very specific things that you do with it, right? You do glory kills to regain health. You use the chainsaw to regain ammo. And so, you know, depending on how you do it, you do one right after the other and switch off. Or what I will do a lot of times now is I will say get health until health is no longer a problem, and then get ammo. In between that, you have fuel that fuels the chainsaw, and you have to monkey around with that a couple times too. So the end result is the convergence of this is, again, in a lot of ways like MLB, is when the game doesn't feel good, right, which is where they've just amped up the freneticism to a point where it's not enjoyable, and there's no way to be successful the first time through, the game doesn't feel rewarding, right? And then you go back the second time and you get through it, or you go back the third time and you get through it, and you're like, oh, fine, you know, on to the next thing. It doesn't feel like you've learned anything that's persistent. It's whatever you learned is only applicable to that room and that level, and the next room and next level you go on to, you're completely back at baseline 0. So and then on the way, a lot of the things that you have to work through are annoying, right? Like my degree of, like, kind of in my ear buzzing, like, of annoyance is pretty high with the game in terms of, okay, great, so, you know, I'm trying to take down the room differently this time, but this time I run out of gas for the chainsaw. Like, and I will say, from a design perspective, that's probably one of my biggest nits, is I feel like there should be at least one weapon in the game that has unlimited ammo, right? And people can hate me and say that that's baby, and that's fine, but that's a paradigm that I'm accustomed to in every other shooter, that you have generally one weapon that either has unlimited ammo, or at least you can carry so much ammo that it's never an issue.
And that's what I've heard about this, right? Where the shotgun only really starts you at what, like 12. The machine gun is really only, it starts at 60, maybe goes up to 90. I mean, it's an intentional limit to get you into that loop. But if what you're saying is that loop never feels, there's never a flow to it. You always feel like you're frantically juggling without necessarily knowing if you're going to succeed in it.
Right. And the frustrating thing is, again, from that standpoint, the weapon they start you with is the shotgun, which, like, just in both real, like, it just is the weapon that you get in any game that has the least amount of ammo, right? Other than, like, a revolver. So that's the weapon that they start you with. So, yeah, it's a little frustrating. I'll also say, you know, some of the weapon modes, as far as, like, the mods, like, you have to, for so many of the enemies, you have to have an explosive round, and like the two mods you can put on the shotgun are explosive or auto. I'm like, well, there's no point in me ever arming auto on the mod, because at any moment I have to be prepared to take on a boss or a mini boss, which is going to require me to have an explosive round, and because the ammo is so limited. Right, so right now I can carry 2 weapons, and then I have a pretty stingily replaceable hand grenade kind of thing, and, like, a shoulder-mounted, like, flamethrower. Those 2 replenish at a rate that's slower than, like, Destiny 2, like, grenades, right? So I can't really depend on them. So in general, I have 2 weapons I can carry. Each of them has an explosive round mod. I'm like, I'm never going to arm auto on my shotgun, because the ammo, limit is such that like I know that my explosive round mod on the other weapon is going to run out, so I have to arm the shotgun with its explosive round mod. So that's just kind of where the game is. I mean, overall, I'm going to play more of it, but kind of overall, my thing is, and I think this is a discussion we're unfortunately going to have throughout the year, is a lot of my question is going to be, like, and hey, look, I want this whole health crisis thing to be over. I want to go back to my regular life. I'm not happy with the way things are. My concern from the game industry perspective is I feel like there are things going on now with sales numbers and games that are being regarded very high that are the result of they're the only things available. We're all stuck inside. They're being regarded, I worry that they're being regarded in a more positive light than they might otherwise be. Doom Eternal is a solid shooter. It's a progression on the 2016 design. It's not Game of the Year material, and I hear that being thrown around already in my mind. Great Scott, if Doom Eternal is like a Game of the Year contender, then like I worry about the rest of 2020.
Right. Time, I think, has a way of evening these things out. So we'll be looking back on it, I'm sure, differently, once some of the other big games come out later on this year. But real fast, I know we're kind of blowing by time, but I knew this was also going to be a difficult show just because there's so many games that we had to cover. That's why I only put one game down on my agenda, because I knew this was going to be bad. Trials of Mana. I played the demo. I saw that DB had picked it up as well, so I thought I'd give that a shot as like my newish game, because everything else I've played, I've talked about. I've been playing Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I've been playing Destiny 2 and Octopath Traveler. So, the usual SwissGuard lineup. But Trials of Mana, my quick thoughts. This is the remake of Seiken Densetsu 3, right, from the Super Nintendo.
Yep.
And I had never
released in North America. Yeah.
Right, as Trials of Mana, and I had never played that. I may have started it.
It never came out in North America, so
I may have played it.
Let's say you did.
I may have played it on a PC, in that vein, right? But it wasn't very much. Now, I'm having difficulty deciding whether I like it. I chose the Valkyrie as my main character, and I got to the point. Oh, you did too? Cool. And I got to the point where I had the fighter fellow join my party, and I played a little bit with two. Things that I like: the battle system's cool. I like the action. It kind of puts you in like when you get into a battle, it kind of restricts your movement, but within like the circle, you have free reign, and you got some nice combos. Odin Sphere is better, but this is 3D and that's 2D, so I think it's a little different. So I was enjoying the battle system. The story is a little bit melodramatic, and for Super Nintendo era, it would have been fine, I think, with reading this. But once they add the voice actors, and it's like the B-level voice actors, it feels a little bit cheesy, especially since every storyline is about how somebody you love died or is kidnapped, and that's your mission. But the biggest thing that I had, like they have the new graphic, the Coda Paint. The maps are the same, because if you look at the mini map, you have, now we're in 3D, but the mini map overlay is definitely Super Nintendo. It is narrow corridors. It looks like you're in the open world, but you're in narrow corridors, and they structure it that way. And every time I go back to these remakes, that's what I get out of it. It's like, this is how I know it's a remake of an old game. It's being constricted in the map, and that's like the biggest, I think, discriminator for some of this stuff. Because like the battle system and all that, that's all fine. It's just the maps, and it's not bad. It's just it feels dated. And so
it gives you a false impression, right? Because the world around the corridor looks expansive, is well rendered, but you can't access it, right? It is very much, you can only get in this path. but you're going to see everything else. And in a modern game design,
so many games,
you
can go there. You see it, you can go do it, explore it. But all that kind of like brings me to the main point I wanted to get to tonight was when they announced Final Fantasy VII Remake, and it was coming out, and they were saying, we're changing this, we're doing that, we're adding that. And I'm like, whoa, that seems like a lot for like a classic game like that. And I'm still not 100%. I'm glad you can switch between like classic battles, like mode system versus the new battle system. The battle system is a little bit, but just the fact that they're willing to say like, we want to rebuild this game from with a modern design, I think is going to end up being a very, very big positive, because these games that they just kind of remake it and throw the coat of paint, you can feel the age. And if they really, and I'm glad that Square Enix is taking the initiative to like, well, you can call it the initiative, you may call it they're spreading it out over multiple games and getting a lot more money, but they're putting a lot more work into it, and I think it's going to pay off. So that was kind of like what I ended up thinking. I enjoyed my time with it, but I don't know if it's going to be able to crack my normal slate of games.
Yeah, so I just want to offer, I guess, somewhat of a counterpoint, even though I find myself agreeing with everything you said, except for I had just come off of playing the demo for Final Fantasy VII, and I played it both in the modern mode and in the classic mode, which really the classic mode just kind of slows down time a little bit more. It doesn't necessarily make it a menu-based active time battle type of thing. I found myself enjoying the charm of Trials of Mana a whole lot more than the kind of intentional edginess, still dated dialogue that the Final Fantasy VII ends up having. Like, there was this kind of cartooniness of Trials of Mana that felt refreshing. Like I agree with you about the gameplay. The action was good. I wish there was a whole lot more action and a lot less talking. One of the things I also did was go back and play a little bit of Trials of Mana on the collection, the 16-bit version, and I got to the same spot in the story about 2 minutes in versus 15 minutes in the remake, right? So, but I think it's just going to speak to a different audience. Like, I think you're right. Like, they're not putting as much time in. They're certainly not putting as much money in to Trials of Mana, but for a certain audience that maybe doesn't want the modern take, it is probably going to feel more comfortable than Final Fantasy VII.
Well, I'm going to go back to one of my standbys here and say Octopath Traveler does the throwback, but does it well because they know what it is. It's a throwback and they embrace it. And it feels like when you do these 3D remakes of the old throwback games, I think you lose a little bit. I mean, I think the charm is there, like you said, but you still lose a little bit of that. And it feels like it's trying to be two things at once. And I think there's a little bit, it's not a big deal. It's a little bit of a detriment. So I haven't played the Final Fantasy VII demo. So that was the thought that I had, is like, maybe it is better that they're going that direction, but you have some experience with it. So I'm glad
I think you're exactly right. Like, I mean, I'm glad that I played it. I'm glad there's a demo. I probably will play multiple characters in the demo, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's going to pull $50 from my pocket.
All right. I think that sounds like a good place to wrap up. Pickz Playz. So, as we've alluded to throughout most of tonight's episode, there hasn't been a lot of new releases in 2020. It's been kind of a desert of a gaming year, and so we have it's the final years of the console generation. There's a few more big, releases that are going to stand out until the next gen launch titles arrive. So I believe Agasicles kind of suggested this pick one of the big 3 releases this month: Animal Crossing, Doom Eternal, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, or a release from that same developer that warrants revisiting if you haven't bought one of these or finished it and whatnot. You can compare and contrast to the older design from the same studio and discuss the progression to the new title. So those were the big 3 March releases. Basically pick them up and or play some of the older titles from the same studio. DB, you've already put here in the agenda, you're looking at Animal Crossing New Horizons, spending more time with that, and you're going to revisit the GameCube version?
I think so, just as a comparison. Maybe you go to the 3DS version because it does a similar thing where you can't all be, it's one file per game. So I may look at that in comparison as well, as we talked about that.
And Agasicles, you, as we kind of been mentioning, have chosen the Doom franchise, so Doom Eternal and perhaps Doom 2016 revisit.
Yeah, I definitely. So right now I have slated to put in about 30 more hours into Doom Eternal. I may not get to that because the game may not be that long. And then probably worth hitting up, as you mentioned, Doom 2016. Last time I touched that, I was playing it on the Switch. I have not revisited on the PlayStation 4, which is where I originally played it. So maybe worthwhile to, now that I have all the consoles finally hooked back up after the faux move out from last year. I would really like to go back and touch up on that on the PlayStation 4 Pro. But we'll see how that goes.
All right, I haven't heard from Prime. I haven't really decided what I'm going to do yet. I'm kind of thinking I might push a little bit and see if I can get one of their releases for April, because Final Fantasy VII Remake and Minecraft Dungeons, I think, were the big ones. Were kind of the ones that I was kind of eyeing as future purchases. So
I think you could even put in Resident Evil 3 in there as well, even that remake.
The real next one that I want to get, though, is the DLC for Control, which was our game of the year last year. But that I can't. I don't think I can shoehorn that into the Pickz Playz.
No, I mean I think that would be fine too. I mean, and then if you wanted to tag up with any revisit of that, you could hit an old Remedy game. Like Alan Wake, I'm pretty sure, was on Game Pass. I mean, again, these things are topical. They're not necessarily meant to be hard and fast, rigid rules. So. But
that's what we're going with. So I think that'll actually do it because we've really blown through time. But I like that we have a lot to talk about. It's better than the alternative. So next week we have Deep Dive, which is covering gaming news. And just today we had some Nintendo Mini Direct, and I think some Nintendo fanboys on the 2KG network were excited about some of the information that came out of that. I know I was. And but next week's Deep Dive is hosted by, looks like, DB and Agasicles, and I will be there as well.
So we don't even get Prime to cheer in on his...
Well, we'll see if he wants to jump in. But yeah, so please join us next week for the Deep Dive. I am SwissGuard, along with Agasicles Stamus and DBqHams. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Keep gaming, and have a good night. Bye.